confirmation that vehicle customization is actually coming. Plentiful data mining on everything from naval combat to new game modes and the remaining 10 weekly mission rewards, alongside when to expect the launch of some of these still to be added Pacific weapons. This is your week on the battlefield. Welcome to this episode of This Week on the Battlefield, the show where we cover news, updates, the community, and so much more all around the Battlefield franchise. As per usual, there's much to cover, so let's jump straight into it. This week in Battlefield 5 saw no major additions in terms of new content or updates. Of course, however, the current weekly playlist, Island Advance featuring Breakthrough, as well as the second weekly playlist, Heat of the Battle, featuring Conquest, remained in place upon popular request, but that is actually going to be changing somewhere near in the future. More on that in just a moment. It's also worth noting that if you want to partake in the Battlefield 5 screenshot competition for a chance to win an RTX 2080 Ti, you can actually still do so until Sunday midnight, that's Pacific time, which means pretty much Monday morning if you're over in Europe. The current weekly mission, of course, is Hold the Course, which is the second week of cosmetic-focused weekly missions, giving us, of course, the Pacific Tiger skin for the Zero. And a similar thing can be said about next week's assignment, which similarly features a cosmetic reward in form of the Border Guard skin for the Japanese faction. Next week's featured playlist will actually replace the current dual Pacific focus we have, combining the two to the Pacific War playlist, which will feature Breakthrough and Conquest, with each map on each game mode featured for 2 consecutive rounds where you play once as the Japanese and once as the American faction. In addition, we will also be getting a squad conquest focused playlist featuring both Operation Underground and the 2 new Pacific maps. In regards to the Pacific War combined playlist, it's also worth noting that that will be staying with us for not quite the remainder of Chapter 5, but at least until December, when probably we will be getting Wake Island, but most definitely we will be getting Update 5.2. In our ever popular and ever evolving, always relevant, soon TM category of news, we have Community Manager Part Welsh confirming this week that not only tank body customization is still coming and is still being worked on, but supposedly has a fixed release date. This lines up with some reports by data miner Temporyal that tank body customization saw a pretty hefty update in terms of the code through Update 5.0, with new parts of it being added, but that it isn't quite yet finished for launch just yet. Good to see DICE finally making true on one of their promised features for launch almost 1 year ago now. Jeff Braddock, the other community manager for Battlefield 5, meanwhile has stated that private games will see a live stream, most likely featuring all of the relevant details and the launch date, sometime towards the end of this month. Speaking of Temporyal, in our Temporyal goodness, always of course to be taken with a generous helping of salt, given the data mining origins of the provided information, we have plentiful to talk about this week, as not only has the man been very busy since the launch of Update 5.0, but I may have also forgotten to include some of his information in last week's episode. Leaving that to one side though, the first thing we have to talk about is naval warfare, possibly coming as soon as Wake Island, or the likely to be later released and still in the works Salomon Islands map, or maybe even as part of Chapter 6 or 7. That isn't currently known. What we do know is that Temporyal has found further references to the patrol boats, specifically the 2 variants, the PT-1 MTB and Elco PT boat, which have been in the game for quite some time now, but seemingly are still being updated and worked on. Further to that, the Kami amphibious tank, which of course is currently already in the game, actually supposedly in its model also includes Type 91 torpedoes, which could of course be specialization options added at a later date, which would make plentiful sense in light of an addition of maybe more naval orientated warfare. Then in new game mode news, we have BattleZone to talk about, a supposed 16v16 competitive multi-stage game mode featuring TDM, Domination, Capture the Flag, and Rush. And then if there's no winner, also Final Stand. This could act as somewhat of a replacement for the, cancelled competitive mode for those who want to do so on maybe smaller private rented servers with player restrictions for 5v5 or 8v8, more competitive scenarios where the rest of us will probably play this on public servers where we can basically have what is essentially a TDM Domination Capture the Flag playlist. In addition to BattleZone, there's also the long worked on and long in the game files Invasion Mode, which supposedly seems to function as essentially a significantly more complex version of Outpost, with building, defending, and destroying and capturing of enemy resources being part of the gameplay. Players will supposedly have to capture, build, and defend so-called special resources to get their respective bonuses in order to help them win the game for their team. These supposedly include structures like a tank factory, an airfield for their respective vehicles of course, as well as a radar station to allow the spotting of enemies, and a barracks in order to spawn more troops. 2 rounds per map will be played with 64 players in total, but how exactly this will play out and if this isn't a little bit too complex for, let's say, your average public Battlefield server remains to be seen. Then in upcoming chapter rewards, thanks to Temporyal's hard work, we know all but a few weeks and what to expect from them. In week 4, supposedly, the reward will be the barbed baseball bat, continuing the melee and cosmetic streak of the weekly missions out until week 4. Week 5 is one of those currently unknown, whereas week 6 will supposedly feature the new lunge mine gadget for taking out those pesky tanks. Week 7 then features the Bar M1918A2 as reward, with week 8 and 9 still being unknown, whereas week 10 features the Nambu Type 2A SMG, 11 the Type 97 LMG, and week 12 the M3 Grease Gun. What's worth noting here is that firstly, the last 3 weeks here are already in January, which, if you can do a little bit of simple math, won't be a surprise to you. The second thing is that, as chapter 4 has shown, these things can very much still be changed, not only for those still lying quite a bit in the future, but even on short notice. If DICE decides that maybe they want to change things up, reward something different, or the gun isn't quite ready for release just yet. And lastly, in Temporyal related news then, we have some cosmetics, including the rare and epic versions of the crewman skin for the Americans, which in form of the common version most of you would have unlocked in week 1 of chapter 5, and the border guard skin in, once more, rare and epic variants, which next week, the common variant will be available to unlock via week 3 of chapter 5. Over in community news, things were definitely quieter this week, but there are some items to cover. Firstly, if you want to let DICE know what you think about Battlefield 5 and more specifically of course Chapter 5, then a new community survey is out. It's probably the best way to get your feedback and opinion to DICE directly, so if you want to share your thoughts with them, this is the way to go. It will of course be linked down below in the description. Secondly, there was plentiful discussion about the Pacific playlist this week, the community openly lobbying DICE to keep it around instead of replacing it with a new playlist next week, which has resulted in, well, essentially the 2 playlists being combined into one, as previously reported, and being available up until at least December. On a slight side note here, I wanted to apologize for the lack of content on the channel this week. With a bit of luck, things should be getting better next week. In our only in Battlefield moments, this week we start off with a classic roadkill streak by the one and only Omar Akab 02. Next up we have Club Trooper with a public schooling lesson on why not to get out of your tank. Over on Operation Underground, we have Get Your Ammo Here, a fantastic username by the way, dispatching of a team of, well, absolutely blind enemies. And to round things off this week, we have Kalua Boy going up against one of the most skilled players I have at least ever seen in a merry-go-round chase to see who gets killed first. But with that, we're coming to the end of this week's episode. If you enjoyed the show, found it interesting or entertaining, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share, and of course hit me up with your feedback, suggestions, and opinions down below in the comments or over on Twitter. With that being said, however, I'd like to thank you very much for watching and hope to see you in the next episode of This Week on the Battlefield.